Hey, what's going on, guys? Leading up to the release of Temtem, I made a video titled Responding to Complaints About Temtem's Price. In that video, I essentially outlined what I considered to be seething hypocrisy regarding people's reactions to the price reveal. This argument hinged on the fact that many people who had no issue paying $80 Canadian for Pokemon Swish were complaining about Temtem being $40 Canadian, despite the fact that Temtem seemed to have more content than Sword and Shield. There were complaints about the game being early access and being priced too high for an indie game. There were complaints about the stress test booting people out, and there were even complaints stating that the game should be free to play since it was kickstarted. Yeah, I don't know the logic portrayed by some of these people, but that last one's absolutely ridiculous to say the least. In that previous video, I wasn't really quite able to fully flush out my arguments due to the fact that my experience playing Temtem was limited to the stress test itself, which only netted me a couple hours of gameplay between the three of them. I figured that now, since I've played through the early access, completed all the side quests, and caught all of the currently available Temtem, I could finally follow that video up with having 224 hours of gameplay under my belt. Now, before I begin, just like the last video, I'm going to warn everyone that I am going to be comparing this game to Sword and Shield quite a bit, due to the obvious similarities between the two franchises. Yes, Temtem in many ways is a quote-unquote Pokemon clone, but labeling it as such and dismissing it only makes you seem insecure of yourself. If Temtem truly is nothing more than a cheap knockoff, then why does it have such an active community? Why didn't an indie game sell 500,000 copies in its first month? Now, that's not to say that just because something sells, it's a quality product, but if it's nothing more than a piece of crap clone, you'd think no one would buy it. It's not like it's been coming out with subpar products for the last few years and literally selling games based not on merit, but instead on nostalgia and brand association. Anyways, getting back on track, I'm going to be coming at this from the perspective that if you're willing to pay $120 Canadian for a Pokemon game, you can't forget about that expansion pack, and are still trying to tell me that Temtem isn't worth the price, your bias is ridiculous. Now, if you're someone who isn't captivated by Temtem, that's totally fine. You might not like the creature designs, the stamina system, or whatever. That's simply a preference, no worries. But when you're going around saying that $40 is a ripoff or not worth it, then I have an issue. Especially when you're willing to pay, like I said, $80 for a product with less going on in it than an early access title from an indie developer. I wouldn't have even made this video if it wasn't for the fact that I keep seeing people complaining about the price point, and it's driving me a little crazy. It's just the blatant hypocrisy of Swish fanboys going on about how this isn't worth the price. But anyway, a big rebuttal to the price point of Temtem is the fact that it's an early access game and $40 is too much. What I think a lot of people are missing is that this early access game is probably going to cost full price upon its release in 2021. If the second half of the game is anything like the first in terms of content, and they have stated that it's about 50% of the game in the alpha right now, this game will be well worth $80 if you consider the fact that it takes most people anywhere from 30 to 40 hours to get through the first half of the story, aka the alpha. If the full game doubles that, you have a pretty lengthy game. The problem with the whole, it's an early access argument is that it doesn't recognize the fact that you're getting the game at a discounted price, and said game already, regardless of what the full access is going to be like, has more than the complete product of Sword and Shield. If Temtem is an early access game, then by the gods, so is Sword and Shield. It took me less than 20 hours to get through Swish's story, and it's not like I rushed through it. I ran through the wild area, I caught whatever I saw that I didn't have, stuff like that. I didn't just bum rush the game. If anyone saw my Temtem Let's Play, that's how I played Sword and Shield. Other than the usual completing the decks, shiny hunting and stuff like that, Swish doesn't really have any major features or side quests or really anything new. There's camping, which is just a reskin of Pokemon Refresh coupled with a reskin of Poffin making for Curry, and raids, which have proven to be almost unplayable in the sense that the game already has trouble connecting to other players, and even more than that, they're frustrating to the point of no end. Like, seriously, who decided that it'd be a good idea to only give you one chance to capture these Gigantamax Pokemon, and then give you 3 AI teammates that literally try to die while you're fighting the boss? You don't even have to die. Your Pokemon could just not die the entire time, but if fucking youngster Joey throws out his Rattata and dies 4 times, well, good luck, you're screwed, have fun. In the Swish Facebook group, I've seen people complaining to no end about how people are charging real money to get raid partners because finding people is that bad. Anyways, tangent aside, the game is pretty bare bones from a content perspective. Sort of like X and Y, but at the very least, those games were the first generation to sort of upgrade to 3D models, and they only costed like $45 Canadian. Temtem, by the way, costs less than this. Temtem, on the other hand, is not a complete product. That's a fact. It's an early access title, but features weekly goals, which I'll admit are simplistic, but nonetheless usually rewarding when the rewards are good. It also has a side park which features rotating Temtem each week, as well as a decent amount of side quests that aren't overtly complex but detailed enough to be entertaining and have a much needed layer of complexity that this sort of game needs. You know, some tamers might want to see specific Temtem, some might want you to get them something, some might need you to find someone, etc. A lot of these side quests will net you a TC or training course, which is basically the Temtem equivalent to a TM from Pokemon. Temtem also shares a lot of functions with Pokemon, like shinies or Lumas in this case, completing a Pokedex or Tempedia, link battles, etc. Temtem basically covers all the same bases as Pokemon is my point. The game has more overall content than Sword and Shield, yet it's only 50% complete. This doesn't even take into account the fact that if you did pay the $40, you're getting access to the other 50%, which will include tons of features like creating your own house, another 75 Temtem, a battle frontier, ranked matchmaking system, achievements, an auction house or like RuneScape GE equivalent, more weekly goals, and just more of everything. This is, by the way, is not a biased take. Pokemon Switch are heavily lacking in features, and if you're fine with that, that's totally cool, but don't turn around and say Temtem isn't worth the price simply because it's an incomplete game. The true crux of this issue is that Temtem is an indie game, and people are more likely to pay more money for a brand that they recognize than to take a risk and try something new, even if that new thing is still very similar. I totally get that, but that doesn't mean that the thing you're too scared to try isn't worth what it costs. I'd rather pay $40 for an entire outfit than $80 for a shirt because it happens to have a brand name on the tag. But perhaps that's just my take. Another big complaint about Temtem is that the server issues present during the stress test were, quite bad. And of course, like I said, the stress test was supposed to be the way it is. It's a stress test, but people, of course, are intellectually inept and don't understand the purpose of a stress test. Granted, the game did have a lot of server issues at launch, and that did suck. So those complaints, as much as a lot of people just jump down the throats of Crema for it, I do understand those kind of complaints. Like, hey, I just bought this game and I can barely play it. They did fix the issues pretty quickly, but that I can attest to. That was annoying, and I get if you're upset about that. But those issues are gone now, and the game's still $40. It's still worth the price. Sorry if this video somewhat overlapped with the last one, but I figured since I'm in a more knowledgeable position given my time with the game, I could formulate more concrete points regarding the amount of content in it. My idea for making this video actually stems from a friend of mine who watched a certain someone's video saying that Temtem is trash and an uninspired mess, which is actually quite ironic seeing as the same man spewing this nonsense is trash and uninspired himself. I think a big part of animosity towards Temtem from the Pokemon community, or specifically fanboys, is that people see the Temtem community as this sort of anti-Pokemon movement, which it's not. A lot of us got tired with Game Freak's antics. I can't speak to everyone else's opinions, but I do know that me as well as many others would love to see Pokemon step up its game and release quality products like it used to. Temtem and Pokemon can coexist. This creature collecting format's really becoming its own genre. It was always kind of weird to call Pokemon a JRPG, considering the vast amount of characters and the amount of customization you can have on your team. This is more of its own genre now, the monster taming genre. We have Kindred Fates, Koromon, Monster Count, all these games that are very similar, and people will say, oh, they're just Pokemon clones, but they're still unique in their own way. Temtem does not need to eat Pokemon. Pokemon does not need to eat Temtem. I wish more people could understand that. My disdain for Swish isn't out of a hatred for Pokemon, but instead out of love for the franchise that got me through a rough childhood. Pokemon's always been way more than just a game to me, and it may sound ridiculous, but it was an escape to a world where I had freedom and the power to pave my own path, choose my own partners, and forge ahead to victory. I think a subsect of the Pokemon community went into Temtem to specifically hate it and nitpick it purposefully to a degree of absurdity. To a degree where they'll make 5 videos telling you to return the game because it's a gauntlet of trainer battles as if Pokemon isn't literally the same thing, and make a video during the game's Kickstarter phase saying that it's going to be trash. How convenient that your opinion just perfectly lines up a year later. It's almost as if you might have went into it trying to hate it. At the end of the day, if you love Pokemon, you'll love Temtem. $40 is definitely worth the price if you use Swish as a comparison. I mean, hell, the 3DS games go for $50 nowadays, so $40 is extremely reasonable. If you haven't gone around to buying Temtem and, are wondering if the game's worth it, I'd like to formally recommend that you do. I think it's awesome. I'm hopeful yet skeptical regarding this new DLC that's planned for Pokemon Sword and Shield. I'd almost rather a third game in this case, because the problem with it is that you still have to get through that bare bones base product to get to that post-game DLC. Whereas in a third version of the game, they could have just fixed all the issues. Now, that's not to say the third version way of doing things is better, but I think at this point Sword and Shield is just so beyond repair that it's almost warranted. The game should have been much more content heavy, and I'm hoping at least whatever next Pokemon games come out fix a lot of the issues. It's not even about the decks. Like, I don't think this is a acceptable title even if it had all the Pokemon in it. It's very, very bare bones. Like, Sun and Moon had more content. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this little rant, and if you did, make sure to like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at GymLeaderEd, and check out our Discord server linked in the description below. Until next time, guys, peace.